The war chamber had not been cleaned in 4 months. Nobody talked about it. Nobody ordered the cleaning staff to go in, and nobody ordered them to stay out. It just happened the way some things happen in a palace, through collective silence, through an unspoken agreement, that some rooms belong to grief now, and the rest of the empire can wait outside. Empress Zavale sat at the head of the long black table and looked at the star map. It was still running. The holographic light threw blue shadows across her face, and across the walls, and across the empty chairs where her war council used to sit, before they started finding reasons to hold their meetings in other rooms. The map showed the outer belt sector in quiet detail. Every asteroid cluster, every drifting debris field, every shipping lane marked in pale gold. And at the far edge of it, one coordinate blinked, steady and patient and relentless, the way a bad memory will blink at the back of a person's mind for months without stopping. She had not turned it off. She had been in this room for 3 hours, and before that, she had been in the throne room for 6, and before that, she had slept for 2 hours in the chair by her window, because her bed felt like a place that belonged to someone else now. Her advisors had stopped commenting on this. Her physicians had stopped recommending things. Even Velk, her first warden, who had an opinion on everything and the nerve to share it, had gone quiet on the subject of her sleeping habits. Not on everything else, though. He was standing near the far wall right now, speaking in a low voice to 2 council members whose names she could remember if she tried and chose not to try. He had a way of standing near walls during important conversations, close enough to the room to be part of it, far enough from the center to seem uninvolved. She had noticed this about him 20 years ago. She had filed it away and done nothing with it, because Velk was useful, and useful things got kept until they became something else. She was starting to wonder what he was becoming. The Eastern Expansion Proposal, one of the council members said, barely above a whisper. It requires a signature. It has required one for 6 weeks. The Empress is managing a period of personal difficulty, Velk said. His voice was gentle. It was always gentle when it was being the most dangerous. We give her time. The Dominion cannot. We give her time, Velk said again. The gentleness had a floor in it now. And we prepare as responsible advisors for every possible outcome of that time. She did not look at them. The star map blinked. The door opened and a young attendant came in carrying tea that nobody had asked for. This was how Sova operated, appearing with things before people knew they needed them, which was either a gift or an irritating habit, depending on the day. She was 20 years old and had been assigned to the Empress's personal staff 8 months ago, right before everything changed. She moved through the room the way young people move through rooms full of grief, carefully, watching the floor, trying not to make the air heavier than it already was. She set the tea down near the Empress's right hand. She was leaving when her sleeve caught the edge of the data console. The console woke up. A voice came out of it. It was not a political report or a military briefing. It was a personal recording, the kind made on a private channel, the kind that gets automatically synced to the palace archive, without anyone reviewing it first. The voice was young. It was explaining something with so much enthusiasm that the words were coming faster than the thoughts behind them could organize. And they were arguing, Mother, genuinely arguing, at full volume, over whether the food was too salty or not salty enough. And nobody won. They just kept going. And then they all ate it anyway and argued about whether it was better than the last meal. I have been sitting with this crew for 2 days, and I have not seen them agree on a single thing. And yet somehow they all seem perfectly happy. I don't understand it. I've been trying to understand it. Sova's hand froze over the console. The 2 council members near the wall went still. Velk turned his head very slightly and looked at nothing. Rinvor's voice kept going, warm and delighted, and completely unaware of any room it was filling, 4 months after the last time it would ever fill a room. The one they called Jake, he fixed the coolant coupling on their ship. This morning, using a piece of scrap metal, and something he described as stubborn optimism, which I believe is a joke, but I'm not certain. Humans are very difficult to be certain about. Mother, they are the strangest, the most. I keep wanting to show you. I keep thinking she would find this so. The recording cut off, not because it had ended, because Javael had placed one finger on the console. The room was silent for a long time. Sova stood with her head down and her hands at her sides and did not move, because moving felt like it would break something that was not yet finished breaking. Velk cleared his throat, very softly. It was a small sound designed to remind the room that there were still things to do, still a dominion to run, still a forward motion that grief was not allowed to stop permanently. It was a sound he had clearly rehearsed. The Eastern Expansion Proposal. Leave, she said. Just that. Velk left. The 2 council members left. The room emptied in the efficient way rooms empty when someone with 700 years of authority says a single word in a certain tone. Sova was almost at the door. Not you, the Empress said. Sova stopped. She turned around. She stood near the wall, not near the center, and waited, because sometimes that was the only thing that made sense to do. Javael picked up the tea. She held it in both hands, the way a person holds something warm when they are very cold but don't want to say so. The star map threw blue light across her face. The coordinate blinked. She looked at it the way she had been looking at it for 4 months, not with anger, not with despair, but with the steady, exhausted attention of a person waiting for it to tell her something different. Waiting for the universe to have made a different choice. Waiting for the blinking to mean something other than what it meant. It kept blinking. Her teacup cracked. A clean split, right down the center, from the rim to the base. The tea held for a moment, and then ran slowly across the table. She did not look at it. She did not look at it. She kept her eyes on the map, and her hands wrapped around the broken cup, and the blue light kept moving across her face, and the Dominion held 40 star systems in its grip, and none of them, not a single one, could give her back what that coordinate had taken. Sova did not move. Jake Mercer woke up on a cold metal floor, with a split lip, no shoes, and a datapad he had apparently been holding so hard in his sleep that the casing had a new crack in it. He looked at the crack for a moment. Then he looked at the room. The room was a detention bay. He had been in a few detention bays across a few different systems, and this one was, objectively speaking, the nicest. The wall material was some kind of dark stone that caught the light in a way that was almost pretty. The ceiling was high. There was a bench, which he had not used, and a water fixture, which he had, and a communication panel on the wall that had been lit green for the past 11 hours, and had produced absolutely nothing useful in that time. He stood up. His back complained about the floor. He ignored it. The Kali June was somewhere in the docking bay, 3 levels up, or at least that was where they'd been taking her when the Vakori patrol ships had escorted them in. His crew was in a separate holding area, which he'd been told once and had asked about 6 times since, just to make sure the answer stayed the same. It had stayed the same. That was something. He looked at the datapad. The screen was still lit, still showing the manifest he had pulled from the emergency capsule 3 days ago in the outer belt debris field, when what he thought was a piece of salvageable hull plating turned out to be a very deliberately sealed personal effects container with a Vakori royal crest on the side and a name logged in the system that had taken him the better part of a day to trace to the right family. The right family turned out to be the only family in 40 star systems that had the word Dominion attached to it. Well, Jake had thought, that tracks. He set the data pad down and walked to the communication panel. He pressed the green button. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge," he said. "I've been saying that for 11 hours. I have something that belongs to someone important, and I need to return it to the right person. Not just any person, the right one." Static. Then, "Your request has been logged." "My request was logged 10 hours ago," Jake said. "I would like my request to be answered." "Your request has been logged." "Yeah," Jake said. "I heard you." He let go of the button. He sat back down on the floor, because the bench was too short to lie down on, and the floor was at least honest about what it was. 3 levels up, his co-pilot Danny Reyes was almost certainly driving someone crazy in a different way than Jake was driving people crazy down here. Danny operated at a higher volume and a lower patience level. He was 24 years old and from Houston, and had opinions about everything and the vocal range to share them at length. Jake had hired him 2 years ago because he could fix an engine faster than anyone Jake had ever worked with, and because the Cali June was a 2-person ship, and Jake needed someone who would keep talking even when Jake didn't want to. Right now, Jake would have given a significant portion of the Cali June to hear Danny complaining about something completely unimportant. The communication panel lit up. Not green this time, a different color, a deeper one, something between blue and black, which Jake had no cultural context for, but which made the back of his neck feel like something had changed. A different voice, older, carrying the particular weight of someone used to being obeyed. "Human, state your purpose." Jake looked at the panel. "My name is Jake Mercer," he said. "My ship and crew were working a legitimate haul in the outer belt sector when we came across a debris field. Inside the field, we found an emergency personal effects capsule. The capsule had a royal crest on it and a name in the manifest. I looked up the name, then I looked up whose son that name belonged to." He paused. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'd like to return the capsule to the Empress directly, if that's possible." Silence. Not the static kind. The kind where someone is deciding something. "You will remain in holding," the voice said. The panel went dark. Jake exhaled and looked at the ceiling. He had expected this part. He was patient about this part in the way that people are patient about things that are frustrating but not surprising. Bureaucracy was bureaucracy. It moved at the same speed whether you were dealing with a human customs station or a 700-year-old alien empire. Maybe slower in this case, because nobody in the chain of authority wanted to be the one to bring this particular item to the Empress's attention. He didn't know the specifics of the palace situation. He was putting it together from the weight in that voice, and the length of the silences, and the way the very first guard who'd processed him had gone a little rigid when Jake mentioned the capsule's origin. Something was wrong in this palace, something beyond grief, though grief was clearly part of it. 3 levels up and across a corridor, Velk was reading the security report from the detention bay on a private channel. "A human salvage worker. An item from the outer belt debris field. A request to speak to the Empress directly." He read it twice. His calculation was fast and clean, the way his calculations always were. A human in possession of an unspecified personal effect from the wreckage of the prince's vessel was either a nothing, a sentimental complication with no political weight, or a something. And a something in the wrong hands was dangerous. And the wrong hands, in Velk's current framework, meant the Empress's hands. Because the Empress was already compromised by feeling things too loudly, and a fresh reminder of her son would make the next 6 weeks of groundwork significantly harder. He smoothed his robe. He went to the detention level himself. He stood outside the bay door and looked through the small observation window at the human sitting on the floor with a cracked data pad, and he thought, "This will be simple." He went in. Jake looked up at him, took him in. The expensive material, the careful posture, the face that had learned a long time ago how to look like it was giving you something while taking something else. Not alien. Not even close to alien. Mr. Mercer, Velk said warmly, I understand you have something to return. I am the first warden of this dominion. You may give it to me. Jake looked at him for a long moment. You're not the right person, Jake said. The warmth in Velk's face did not disappear. It just went somewhere behind his eyes and stayed there. I assure you. I don't need assurance, Jake said. I need the Empress. He said it simply, not aggressively. The way you state a fact that is not going to change, regardless of how the other person feels about it. Velk looked at him. 3 floors above the detention level, Sova was walking faster than was dignified through the palace corridor with a datapad in her hand and a decision she had made entirely above her station, sitting in her chest like a warm stone. She had heard the words outer belt in the security flag that came through the general staff channel. She had made a choice. She found the Empress in the hall outside the war chamber, and she stopped, and she held out the datapad without saying anything, because sometimes the information was the thing, and every other word was just noise around it. Javael read it. She read it again. She was moving before she finished the second read. Her court followed at a careful distance, not stopping her, not quite keeping up, doing the thing they had been doing for 4 months, which was trailing in the wake of her grief and hoping it didn't turn into something they couldn't manage. It already had. Jake heard footsteps in the corridor outside. A lot of them. The door opened. The door opened, and the room changed. Jake had been in a few rooms that changed when a particular person walked in. His grandmother's kitchen whenever his grandfather came home. The salvage yard office whenever the union rep showed up. A bar in the outer belt station where a bounty hunter had walked in looking for someone who turned out to be at the next table. Different kinds of change, different kinds of air. But the common thread was always this. Some people take up space that does not belong to the room they are standing in. It belongs to something larger. The Empress walked in, and the room went very quiet, and Jake stood up, not because anyone told him to, but because his body made that decision before his brain did. She was tall. Her robes were deep blue-black, the color of deep space at the edge, where the stars started thinning out, and they moved with her the way things move that have been worn for a very long time by a very still person. Her face was the kind of face that had been composed for so long that composed had become the default, the resting state, the wall that lived where expression used to be. But her eyes were wrong. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who had not slept through the night since something happened 4 months ago and was not going to pretend otherwise. She looked at Jake. He looked back at her. He did not bow. He had thought about it, briefly, during the last 30 seconds when he could hear footsteps getting closer down the corridor. He had decided against it, for the same reason he had decided against a lot of things in his life. It would have been performance, and he was bad at performance, and performing something wrong was worse than not performing it at all. I've got something of his, Jake said. Your son's. I think you should have it. He reached for the datapad on the floor beside him, and then set it down again, because the datapad was not the thing. The thing was in the emergency capsule that the guard had put on the table when Velk had briefly, triumphantly, taken possession of it, before the Empress had walked in and the whole dynamic of the room had rearranged itself around her. Jake lifted the capsule's release panel. It opened with a soft click. He put the object on the table between them. It was a music device, human-made, the kind that cost about 40 credits at any waystation electronics kiosk, the kind that teenagers bought because it was cheap and small and could hold about 10,000 songs and didn't require a data subscription. The casing was scratched in the particular way cheap electronics get scratched when they are carried everywhere and not treated carefully and loved anyway. There was a small strip of adhesive on the back, where a label had been put on and mostly pulled off. And the ghost of letters remained. The residue of someone having tried to write their name on their belongings, the way children do. Javel looked at it. She did not move. He bought it from one of my crew at a way station in the outer belt, Jake said. About 2 weeks before, he stopped, started again. We'd been docked there for 3 days for repairs. Your son's ship came in for a resupply. He spent most of those 3 days with us, actually. Asked a lot of questions. Ate our food, which I want to say he was very polite about, considering how bad our cook is. He paused. When we found the debris field in the capsule, his name was in the manifest. I looked it up. When I figured out who you were, He rubbed the back of his neck. It took me a while to get here. The patrol stop took a few days off my schedule. I'm sorry about that. The room behind the Empress was full of people. Advisors, attendants, guards in the doorway. Velk stood to one side, with his face arranged into careful patience, which was a face Jake was beginning to recognize as the one that came out when a plan was not going the way it was supposed to go. Nobody else in the room was breathing very loudly. He chose that, Jake said, nodding at the device, to put in the capsule. He had it in his personal quarters, and when the ship, he cleared his throat. The capsule was sealed manually. He chose what went in it. He chose that. Zavel reached out and picked up the device. She was slow about it, both hands. She turned it over, the way you turn over something very fragile, even though the casing was clearly built to take damage and had been proving it. She ran her thumb along the scratched edge. She found the place where the ghost letters were still faintly visible on the back, and held it so the light fell across them. She pressed the button on the side. The room got a different kind of quiet. A man's voice came out of the small speaker, warm and easy, guitar underneath it, singing about a road he used to drive, and a summer he used to know, and a girl who had gone somewhere else, but whose memory lived in the smell of the air when the season changed. It was not complicated music. It was not trying to be anything except exactly what it was, which was one person telling another person that some things stay with you, whether you want them to or not. Javiel went very still. Not the composed kind of still. The kind that comes after composed breaks. The kind that is holding itself together through something other than habit, because habit has temporarily stopped working. She did not cry. Her face did not do what faces do when people cry. It went somewhere else entirely, inward and down, to a place that was not for any room she was standing in. Jake looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor. There was no chair. The room had a table and nothing else. And he sat down against the wall with his knees up and his hands loose in his lap, and he waited. He did not wait with expectation. He did not wait with discomfort or impatience or the performative restlessness of someone who wants to be seen waiting graciously. He just sat, the way a person sits when they have learned, at some point in their life, that certain moments require a body in the room and a mouth that stays closed. The music kept playing. Nobody behind the Empress moved. Velk glanced at Jake on the floor with an expression that was a close cousin of confusion and a distant cousin of contempt. But he said nothing, because the Empress had not moved, and the room was following her lead. Sova stood in the back, near the wall, and watched Jake sitting on the floor, and something shifted in her understanding of something she had not had the right word for yet. The song ended. A different one started, louder, guitars that meant business, a voice that had something to prove. The corner of Jake's mouth moved. Javiel looked at him. He loved that one, Jake said quietly. He played it 6 times in a row the second day. Danny, my co-pilot, nearly lost his mind. Something happened at the edge of Javiel's face. Not a smile. Something that lived in the neighborhood of a smile, and had clearly not been to that neighborhood in a long time, and was standing at the edge of it, not sure if it was allowed back in. He told me, she said, and her voice was careful, the way people are careful when they have not used their voice for anything real in a very long time. That humans argue about food. Constantly, Jake said. It's basically our main hobby. He said he had never seen anything like it. Yeah, he mentioned that. He seemed very entertained. She looked back down at the device. He was always entertained by things I could not understand, she said. He would find something ordinary, and ordinary, and ordinary, and then he would bring it to me and look at me like I was missing the point of everything. She said it without grief in her voice, because grief had somewhere else to be right now. Because right now, she was not the Empress, not the ruler of 40 star systems, not the woman at the center of a succession crisis. She was just a mother who had lost a boy who thought the universe was interesting. Jake said nothing. He stayed on the floor. He stayed there because that was the right thing to do, and he knew it was the right thing to do in the way that does not require explanation or strategy or thought. Some situations have a shape to them, and the shape of this one said, "Do not stand up yet." The music played. The room around them held its breath. By the time the Empress left the detention level, Velk was already moving. He was good at that, moving before the moment required it, positioning himself ahead of the situation, the way a man places a cup under a drip before the ceiling has fully made up its mind to leak. He had been doing this for 60 years in service to the Dominion, and it had served him well, this particular skill of being in the right place slightly before the right time. He was in the High Council chamber when the first 3 senior advisors arrived. He had tea ready. This was the detail that people always underestimated. The tea. "The situation is becoming difficult to ignore," he said, once they were seated. His voice carried the weight of a man who wished he did not have to say the next thing, but felt responsible enough to say it anyway. He had built that voice deliberately, the way you build a tool for a specific job. The Empress spent an hour in a detention bay with a human salvage worker. The Eastern expansion proposal has not been signed in 6 weeks. The Succession Council has raised a concern that is not, I think, entirely without merit. The oldest advisor, a woman named Sheva who had served 3 Dominion rulers and outlasted them all through the simple strategy of never backing anyone until they had already won, looked at him over her tea. "What concern is that?" she said. It was not a question. "The stability of leadership," Velk said carefully. "During a period of prolonged grief," Sheva said. "I was going to say adjustment. You were going to say grief and chose a softer word because you thought it would land better," she said. "It didn't. Say what you mean, Velk." Velk looked at her. He said what he meant. He said it in clean, reasonable language that made the terrible thing he was suggesting sound like responsible governance. He talked about the Dominion's needs and the expansion window and the instability that came from an empty signature line. He talked about the succession mechanism, the ceremonial process by which the High Council could formally request a period of leadership review. He did not say the word exile. He did not need to. Everyone in the room knew what a leadership review meant for the person being reviewed. 2 of the 3 advisors were listening. Sheva was watching. Velk felt the shape of the vote. He felt its weight. He had been building toward this for 6 weeks, not because he wanted power for its own sake. That was the mistake people made about men like him, assuming the goal was the seat, when really the goal was the order, the forward motion, the Dominion running the way a Dominion was supposed to run. Grief was not a governance strategy. Sentiment was not a foreign policy. The Empress had stopped being a ruler and become a mother, and the Dominion did not have the luxury of waiting for her to find her way back. That was what he believed. He believed it genuinely. That was what made him the specific kind of dangerous he was. 3 levels down, Jake Mercer had also been doing something, which was having a conversation with Sova through the door of the detention bay, while she technically escorted him back to holding and actually told him everything. She had not planned to tell him everything. She was not even sure afterward how it had happened. He had asked a question in a tone of voice that assumed a real answer was coming, and she had given one, and then another, and by the time she caught herself, she had outlined the entire succession situation, including Velk's 6-week groundwork, and the upcoming vote, and what a leadership review meant in practice. Jake listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood quietly for a moment. "So what happens to her if the vote goes through?" he said. "She would be removed to the ceremonial residence on the 5th moon. Officially, she would retain her title." Sova paused. "Unofficially, she would retain her title, while someone else ran everything. While the council ran everything. While Velk ran everything." Jake thought about it. 4 seconds. "Where's this council meeting?" he said. Sova looked at him. "You cannot simply," she started. "I'm not going to do anything crazy," Jake said. "I just want to say something. You are a salvage worker from a ship called the Kali June, and you want to walk into the High Council chamber of the Vicori Dominion to say something. Is it far from here? That's not the relevant. Left or right out of this corridor?" Sova stared at him. She had the look of someone watching a thing happen that they know they should stop, and have somehow lost the ability to stop. "Left," she said, before she had fully decided to say it. Jake went left. There was nothing frantic about the way he moved through the palace corridors, past guards who were calibrated to stop things that looked like threats, and had no category for a shoeless human walking with the confident and slightly distracted air of a man who was mostly thinking about the fastest route to a specific room. He nodded at 2 of them. One of them nodded back, confused. He found the chamber because it was the kind of room that announces itself. Double doors, serious carvings, the specific architectural language of a space that believed in its own importance. He pushed the door open and walked in. The room went silent. 4 advisors, Velk at the head, tea on the table, a vote that had been approximately 6 minutes away from happening. Jake looked around at all of them. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'll be quick." Velk's face did something controlled and fast. "This chamber is not. I won't be long." He stood in the center of the room. He did not perform the standing. He just stood there, the way a person stands when they have something to say and are going to say it without decoration. "Your prince spent 3 days with my crew," he said, 2 weeks before he died. "I want to tell you what that looked like, because I don't think you know." Nobody moved. He ate terrible food and said it was interesting. He learned 3 card games and lost all of them and asked to play again. He stayed up most of the first night, asking my co-pilot about Earth, because he had never talked to a human who'd actually been there. He fixed a water pressure valve in our kitchen at 2 in the morning because it was leaking and it was bothering him, and he said he couldn't sleep in a place where something was broken if he knew how to fix it. The chamber was very quiet. He was kind to my youngest crew member, a kid named Cal, who was on his first long haul, and was scared and pretending not to be. Your prince figured it out in about 10 minutes. He didn't make a thing of it. He just started talking to Cal like Cal was the most interesting person he had met, and kept it going for 2 days, until Cal stopped being scared. Jake looked around the room. He was 23 years old, and he knew how to do that. He knew how to see people. He let that land. "I don't know your politics," Jake said. "I don't know what a succession vote means, or what a leadership review is, or what the Eastern expansion proposal says. I don't know any of it. What I know is that there is a woman in this palace who lost that kid 4 months ago, and she is still standing up every day and walking into rooms. You can call that compromised if you want. I'd call it something else." He looked at Velk. "He was a good person," Jake said. "You want to honor that, or you want to do paperwork about it?" The room sat with that. Sheva looked at Velk with the expression of a woman who had watched a great many plans end, and could already see the shape of this one going the same way. Velk opened his mouth. He has my standing. The voice came from the doorway. Nobody had heard her come in. Nobody had heard footsteps, no rustle of robes, nothing. The Empress stood in the open doorway, and the room reorganized itself around her, the way rooms did. And she was looking not at Velk, but at Jake. And her face had something in it that was not quite composed and not quite broken, but something in the space between that had been there for 4 months, and was now, for the first time, pointing outward instead of in. Velk looked at her. He did the calculation. For the first time in a long time, the calculation did not resolve cleanly. The succession vote was shelved. Not cancelled, not permanently dismissed. Shelved, which was a political word that meant not today, because today the math does not work, and everyone in this room understands that. And we will all pretend this was a procedural pause and not a defeat. Velk accepted this with grace, because he was good at accepting things with grace when accepting them poorly would cost him more. He thanked the council for their time. He noted that the Empire's best interests were always his primary concern. He left the room with his robe straight, and his face correct, and the specific stillness of a man who has filed something away to return to later. He was still there. That was the thing. He was still First Warden, still in his offices, still at his post, with his long view and his patient calculations. Jake had watched him leave, and understood that Velk was not the kind of problem that got solved. He was the kind that got managed, indefinitely, by people who did not look away. He hoped the Empress was good at not looking away. He suspected she was. The next 2 days moved through a series of formal things that Jake participated in at a basic level of comprehension. There were documents, which Sova translated. There were meetings with officials whose titles she also translated, and which Jake mostly forgot immediately, because he had too many other things in his head. His crew was released from their holding area, and Danny Reyes spent approximately 45 minutes telling Jake, at volume and with gestures, exactly what he thought about the whole situation, which was that it was insane, and also kind of amazing, and also they needed to get the Cali June's coolant system checked before the next haul, because he'd been hearing a noise. Cal, the youngest crew member, asked if they were really inside the Imperial Palace. Part of it, Jake said. Cal looked around at the stonework and the ceilings and the particular quality of silence that old, enormous buildings carry. Huh, Cal said, with the specific understatement of a 19-year-old who is trying to act like this is not the most overwhelming thing that has happened to them. Jake got a formal commendation from the Dominion. It was read to him by an official, and printed on material that felt more substantial than paper. And it had the Imperial seal on it, and he could not read a single word of it. But Sova told him it said he had performed an act of honorable service, and the Dominion was grateful. He also got a fuel allowance he hadn't asked for, and a diplomatic clearance for the outer belt and surrounding sectors that would make the next several years of salvage work considerably less complicated. He told Danny about the clearance. Danny said, "So we can go into the deep sectors without getting stopped?" Apparently. Danny was quiet for 3 seconds, which was unusual. "We should send that guy flowers or something," Danny said. "He's gone, Danny." "Yeah, a beat. Something, though." He looked out the window at the palace grounds, towers and courtyard, and the pale sky of a world he had never planned to land on, and thought about a 23-year-old who had fixed a water pressure valve at 2 in the morning because he couldn't sleep in a place where something was broken. Jake knew that feeling exactly. On the morning of his departure, he was brought to a room he hadn't been in before, smaller than the formal chambers, with 1 window and 2 chairs, and the quality of a room that had been chosen deliberately for not being official. The Empress was already there when he arrived. She was standing, not sitting. She had the music device in her hand. Jake stopped in the doorway. "Come in," she said. He came in. He sat in one of the chairs because it seemed like she was going to stand, and he had found that sitting while other people stood made conversations easier. It redistributed something. She looked at the device for a moment. "I want to ask you something," she said. "My translators are having difficulty with it. Not with the words, with what the words mean." "Okay," Jake said. "In the detention bay, when you sat down on the floor," she paused. "What is that called?" Jake thought about it. It was the kind of question that deserved a real answer and not a fast one. He sat with it for a moment, turning it over. "Being there," he said. "Just being there. Showing up and staying." "Is there not a more specific word?" "Not really. We have a lot of words for big things. We don't always have good words for the small ones." He looked at her. "I don't think you need a word for it. You already know what it is. You knew to ask about it, which means you recognized it." Javael looked at him for a long moment. "He would have liked you," she said. "He was good company. Genuinely curious about everything. That's rarer than people think." "I know," she said quietly. "I spent 23 years watching it." The room sat with that. Jake stood up. He was going to say the standard things. He was sorry. He hoped things got easier. He would think about her son when he was back in the outer belt. All of it true. All of it things he meant. She spoke before he got to them. "He would have wanted to come with you," she said. "When you left, he would have asked if there was room on your ship. He would have offered to fix things." Jake thought about that for a second. "We would have said yes," he said. She nodded once. He left. He was already calculating the route back to the docking bay, already running the departure checklist in his head, already thinking about the Cali June and the coolant noise Danny had mentioned, and whether they had enough supplies for a full outer belt run, or whether they needed to stop at the way station first. This was not coldness. This was just how Jake moved through the world, full attention on the thing he had just done, then full attention on the thing ahead, very little time spent in the space between. The Cali June lifted out of the docking bay an hour later, with a full fuel load that Jake had not paid for, and a diplomatic clearance code that Danny had already saved in 4 different places in the ship system, because he was not taking any chances with that. Cal watched the palace get smaller through the observation window. "What do you think she does now?" Cal asked. Jake was running the pre-flight checks. He didn't look up. "The same thing she was doing before," he said. "Just maybe a little differently." Cal looked at the window for another moment. "Do you think it helped?" Cal said. "Bringing the thing back? Do you think it actually helped?" Jake finished the check. He leaned back in his seat. "I think she needed to know he chose something," he said. "That when it was happening, he still had something he cared about. Something small and ordinary that he wanted to keep." He paused. "Yeah, I think it helped." In the war chamber, the star map was still running. The coordinate in the outer belt still blinked, patient and relentless in the blue light. Javael sat down, not at the head of the table, where the ruler sat, in the chair beside it, the ordinary one, the one that did not mean anything. She held the music device in both hands. She pressed the button. The man with the guitar came back. A girl in the memory of a particular smell in the air. She listened. She did not compose her face. She did not perform stillness or strength, or the 700 years of weight that she carried every time she walked into a room. She let it all stay where it was, and she just sat in the ordinary chair and listened to the small, ordinary music her son had carried all the way to the edge of the outer dark and sealed in a box so it would survive him. He had been right. She had been missing the point of everything. She understood that now. The star map blinked. She let it blink. 40 star systems turned on the machinery of Empire without her for a little while. She had somewhere else to be. She was just sitting there. She was just being there. She was doing the untranslatable thing. She was doing it for him.